Good afternoon. My name is Vishal Singh, and I'm going to talk about this paper where we look at the effects of environmental perturbation on the attitude towards innovation in construction. So my co-authors in this paper are Marzia and Vinayak. Marzia is an associate director at Mace, London, and she's also an honorary lecturer at UCL, London. Vinayak worked in this project as a research assistant, primarily looking at the data. So, environmental perturbation, crisis, or environmental jolts, what we may call it, is known to alter innovation behavior. Right. So, this is something we have known for some time, both in academic literature as well as this common knowledge among people. However, most of the academic work in this space has looked at the effects of structural characteristics, so the kind of perturbation, the scale of perturbation, and so on. What has been looked inadequately is why the attitudes change. So what are the behavioral mechanisms through which the changes happen in this attitude towards innovation? And that is what we are going to look at in this work. In particular, what we are interested in is to try and look at theoretical models that might be able to explain the innovation behavior both in normal circumstances or business as usual, as well as under perturbation. So we are seeking a consistency in the theoretical models in that space. Work is built on in the work that we did earlier, what we now are calling as excitable innovation behavior model. And this model builds on two seminal works. So one is the Rogers diffusion of innovation model, which has been very significant work in the understanding of innovation and how it diffuses in the ecosystem. And the second is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which talks about how needs evolve in an hierarchical order. And based on this work, the past research which we had done proposed a model where actors' innovation-related needs is divided into primary needs and secondary needs. So that's the hierarchy of needs. And we claimed that there's stable state needs and excited state needs, such that environmental perturbation pushes the needs which are typically stable into excitable states. And for routine workers, what it means is from doing routine work, the perturbation either forces them or excites them to seek innovation and creative work. And vice versa, which means that innovators may reduce their innovation during crisis or during environmental perturbation. In addition, based on the needs approach, we also divided three kinds of needs in the ecosystem. So there are actors who need to innovate. These are innovators, researchers, designers. There are actors for whom the innovation is being done. So that is the potential users. So they need the innovation. And in addition, there is a third category who neither need the innovation, they do not need to innovate either, but they benefit from the transaction or the supply chain between the producers and the consumers of the need. Typically, in an ecosystem, when these three needs come together and they get aligned, we see innovation diffusion happen. That's the position that was there earlier. So the aim of this work, the one that we present here, is twofold. So the first is to validate the applicability of the propositions in light of the new evidence. So the past work, we have a set of theoretical propositions, and we want to see whether in the new, in light of the evidence in this unique situation, are they consistent with what we already know? And in addition, we expect to extend the theoretical model that has been posed earlier. So three primary propositions that we look at in terms of validation. The first is that the excitation not only is there for individuals but also for organizations. This excitation can be both positive and negative, which means that environmental perturbation can not only increase innovation but they can also decrease innovation. And the third is that even if there is a perturbation driven behavioral desire to change, whether that change is acted upon or not is contingent on the actor's degrees of freedom. And so these are the three propositions we would like to validate in this study. And in addition, we expect to study the role of other contextual factors like organizational size, cultural context, background of the respondent, and so on. and following the grounded research approach, we are expecting data-driven insights that are not necessarily driven by a pre-existing theoretical model or hypothesis. So the research approach is as follows. So we started with the theoretical model, which led to the questionnaire designed. The questionnaires were based on multiple choice approach. However, respondents could also add comments in response to these questions. And this approach sort of looks at specific aspects of validation. In addition to that, follow-up interviews were conducted with some of the participants, which was semi-structured, and in the semi-structured approach allows narrative descriptions, allows respondents to provide examples, anecdotal evidence, and so on. So collectively we get quantitative as well as qualitative data for analysis, for validation, testing, and refinement of the models. So we collected 266 survey responses over 3 months, and the questions were divided such that for each question, the respondents provided information about their own behavior, about their colleagues' behavior, and the organization's behavior. And this is useful. The first, especially the self and colleagues, is where we wanted to see whether there's actor observer bias noted in the responses or not. In addition, as stated, we conducted 14 interviews, and these were one-to-one interviews ranging from 30 to 60 minutes. So here are some of the survey results very quickly. So the first part of the survey responses provided us insights into who these respondents were. So it sort of gives their contextual background, and these contextual background could then be used to sort of filter the answers and see how the contextual factors affected the behavior, or if there's any pattern observable there. And so there were respondents from companies of different sizes, as you can see here. So about 23% respondents were from companies that had more than 5,000 employees, and so on. About 84% of the respondents believe that they were somehow or the other related, innovation-related jobs in business as usual. Similarly, we got to understand their organization's typical approach towards innovation, and also the respondents' belief as how they thought they approach towards their own approach to innovation was in business as usual, and there are similar sort of patterns collected, how that changed during the COVID scenario. Similarly, this chart gives a distribution of the countries from which the respondents belong. And you can see that a large part of the responses are from Europe, and there are noticeable patterns, similarities. In general, in most countries, there's an increase in innovation reported. In many places, it's remained the same as well, and in many other places, there's reduction in innovation activities reported as well. In some countries, not. So once we get into these at a granular level, we can start to see patterns of similarities and differences across different countries, and that gives us more in-depth analysis. Similarly, here we have another chart as an example, where the responses are based on the respondents' current job title, and how their behavior changed during COVID. You can see most of the responses, of course, are in this segment, but also there's a significant increase in the innovation behavior among BIM experts and managers. And this is consistent with what we found in the interviews as well, because most of these innovation that they're talking about is largely related to adoption of digital technologies, remote working technologies, and so on. Again, looking at the distribution of responses based on the size of the organizations, we see that there are discernible patterns that can be observed. For instance, in this case, the increase in innovation in larger organizations is much more significant than some of the other cases. whereas similarly, even in very small firms, the increase is quite reasonable. And that's noteworthy because a lot of construction organizations fall in this category of 1 to 10 members in their company. So uh, the increase in innovation activities as well as decrease in innovation activities is seen across the range of companies. As stated earlier, respondents provided insights into their own behavior as well as about their colleagues and organizations. And if we look at these together or club them, for instance, if we say increased in innovation behavior and innovation behavior remaining the same both as a positive sentiment, whereas these two as negative sentiment, we see that the way respondents judge their own response to innovation is slightly different than how they judge their own their colleagues or their organizations response. So the negative sentiment is around 19% here. Similarly, it's around 19% here as well, 18.5, 19%, right? Whereas the percentages are slightly different here. So once we start getting into these details, we see that there are further insights to be gained. Similarly, here respondents provided reasons of why they thought the behaviors changed for themselves, for their colleagues, as well as their organization, and we can see look into these details and find the patterns there. Besides choosing amongst what was given as options of why the behaviors changed, they also provided their own reasons of why the behaviors changed, and some of those are listed here. For instance, so in this case, the respondent felt that there was an opportunity to innovate, so this was more of a voluntary choice. Here it says it's only way to keep me updated, so not much of a choice, but still a voluntary action. In the third case, it's not even a voluntary choice, rather it was a decision taken by the shareholders and the actors had to act upon. So kind of hinting towards the degrees of freedom and the constraints that are there. Again, then we have coincidence in the sense of alignment of the timing, and of course crisis sort of leading to priority being clarified. And similar sort of patterns were observable in the qualitative data. Again, we do not have time to go into details, but here if we look at one quote for them, so this is a paraphrased statement. So normally not everyone will be convinced towards innovation if it's business as usual. Not everyone is willing, and motivation is not that easy in normal circumstances for innovation, but pandemic forced everyone to be in the same situation, so it was easier to get them to innovate, right? So based on all of these patterns across the surveys as well as the interviews, some of the key findings are noted here. So there is a noticeable change in attitude in both individual level as well as organizational level. There's both positive as well as negative change, and actors' innovation activities in many cases are contingent on their degrees of freedom. So all the earlier propositions that were there in 2014-2015 paper have been validated in these studies. In addition, one of the interesting things that came out from the interviews in particular, and also so in the open-ended comments noted there, is environmental perturbation seems to accelerate the alignment and prioritization of the needs of the different stakeholders in the innovation ecosystem. So this goes back again to the three types of needs, and the importance of alignment of these needs for innovation to diffuse or innovation to be taken forward. So overall, as conclusion, we can say the following. The attitude towards innovation during COVID are consistent with the excitable innovation model, which we found through the survey, as well as in the examples provided by the respondents. Further insights that came were that perturbation creates conditions for faster prioritization and alignment of needs, and the needs become shared because everyone is looking at the same needs, which doesn't normally happen in business as usual because people have varied needs and prioritization does not take place. So from individual actors' perspective, what it means is that perturbations seem to reduce options, make priorities explicit, and force time-bound decision actions, which are critical. And these are lessons that we can take forward in planning to diffuse innovation in business as usual. So amongst future work, what we are looking at is to look at further qualitative analysis of the interview data, and then building on a computational model for what-if studies. So with that, I'll stop here, and I'll be happy to take questions when we're there. Thank you.